So, you've picked up Skul the Hero Slayer, you've done a couple of runs and you're having fun, but you're not really sure how to do a build. You're not sure what items are good, what effects you should be looking for, how to build particular characters, what does Werewolf want, what does Alchemist want. Your survivability isn't really great, you're not sure how to improve it. And my god, what are inscriptions and are they important? Short answer, yes, but we're going to get into that with a quick and dirty breakdown on what you need to do to make your builds better. And I do mean quick and dirty, because this is not going to be an all-encompassing guide on every item, effect, inscription, and build in the entire game. It'd be way too long to do all of that. Instead, this is a primer. This is a getting started, but do not worry, because what I'm going to tell you in this video will serve you for about 90% of your runs. Let's get started. First and foremost, magical damage and physical damage. The most important thing that you need to do is establish what your chosen skull's damage preference is. So here we have Werewolf. If we take a look at Werewolf's effects, we can see that he has a lot of orange text that says physical damage. We can see at a glance that he is dominantly a physical damage dealing character. We can also double on that and see that he does physical damage by doing his basic attacks. Whenever he hits a dude, we have orange numbers. That tells us that it is physical. We can also do his ability, his Beast Leap, and we have orange numbers as well. If you see a yellow number in there, that's a critical hit, just so you know. Critical hits come up in big yellow numbers. But in addition to this, what if we have a different werewolf that has a magical attack, like the Rip Apart effect that this guy has? Blue numbers, oh no, what do we do? Well, I'm not going to recommend that you start worrying about hybrid builds right now. That's a little bit more advanced and is a bit trickier to make work reliably. It does work, it's just for newer players, I'm going to recommend that you pick a skull or a damage type and focus on that exclusively. So let's say you're doing physical damage to make a build work with your physical damage dealing werewolf. Here we have the standard issue Carlean sword. Common item, you're probably going to see a lot of these in your runs. If we pick it up, it has the effect that it gives us 30% more physical damage. We can verify that if we take a look at our stats. Our magic attack was 160 and our physical attack is 190. Because it's meant to be even from the very beginning and our only damage boost is now that item, we can see that we've had a 30% boost in damage. But what if I told you the most important part about this item is not the 30% damage boost, but this right here, the inscription effects that it has. If you're not sure what these are, they're basically like set bonuses or stackable perk bonuses, and you get them activated by having multiple of the same one put together. There are a few that only need one or so in order to activate, but the general gist is you're going to need more than one for the majority of them. So we have Spoils and Courage. Not gonna lie, Spoils kinda poo-poo, don't worry about it. It's just a basic little 2-point effect anyway. It's on a lot of common items. It's there, it's nice, don't worry about it. Courage is the main reason this sword is so good, and why every item that has Courage on it is something you should be looking for when building a physical skull, because Courage will give you a physical attack amp by 20%. But before we get into that, I need to explain the difference between Amplified and Increase. So, the standard issue Carlean sword increases physical attack by 30%. We can see that because our physical damage went from 160 to 190 when I equipped it. Don't believe me? I'll destroy it. We're back down to 160. So now, what if I pick up another item that has Courage on it, like the Warrior's Gloves? Now, if we take a look at our inscription, it's highlighted. The text is no longer grayed out. The 2-stack of Courage is active. But the Warrior's Gloves don't give us an actual damage increase, it just has an effect that does damage whenever we, dash. So we shouldn't expect to see our number go much higher than 190 up to maybe, what, 210 because of the 20%? Well, no, it'll actually go to 228. And that is because increasing effects, like the Carlean sword, if it says it increases, that is an additional effect. It's just basic 1+1 math. Whereas Courage, and more importantly, Amplify effects are multiplicative. They're multipliers, so that's a times instead of a plus, right? We're going back to basic math. So whatever number we were at, the 190, was then multiplied by 20%, and that was added to the total value. Amplifiers are insanely powerful. They're very, very, very good. and it's the reason why courage is such a strong effect. While we're talking about this, I'm very quickly going to show you that the basic Kalean staff has more or less the exact same effects on it, except for magic damage dealers instead. Wisdom is the exact 1-to-1 equivalent of courage. So if you're doing a magical build Skul, I highly recommend you seek out wisdom. Physical, courage. Magic, wisdom. It's exactly the same thing, just blue text and blue numbers instead of orange text and orange numbers. So then what if I add another Kalean sword to the mix? This is going to increase our physical attack by 30% again, so we would expect that my total damage goes to 258, right? I pick it up, we check. It's 264. Well, why is that? That is because amplifying effects, the multipliers, always get added last. So first things first, it added the 30% to the base number. So our 160 went to 190, and then our 190 went to 220, and then that 20% multiplier kicked in, which gives us a 264%. So every additional boost that we have is going to make our total number better once multipliers kick in. Let's say I add this Giant's Axe to the mix, which has a 40% physical damage boost. Are we going to get around 200? Well, no. It now is sitting at 312%. It is quickly getting out of hand because the game is going to start adding all of the base boosts to our total number before it then multiplies it by that 20%. But as you can see, our courage is at 3, and we get an extra effect if we hit courage 4. Now, you're not expected to find multiple duplicates of the exact same weapon in a run, but I'm going to use the Kalean swords for the purpose of this demonstration just to make things a little bit simpler. But in a given run, you're probably going to find a lot more different items anyway. But now we finally have 4 courage. If we deal physical damage to an enemy, we will get a 45% damage amp for 10 seconds. This is a very powerful effect. If I look at my total damage right now, 348%. Let's run over and find a target dummy, and if we slap that dummy, our courage effect is now active. We are glowing a nice red. We can see the buff down in the center of the screen, and if I look at my damage, it is at 505%. All of these boosts have been multiplied by an extra 45 at the end after we hit an enemy, and so for 10 seconds, we're going to be doing some much bigger damage. On the topic of amplification effects, there are other inscriptions and effects in the game that you can find that will also be considered amplifiers. So Master Fighter has a pretty decent effect where it's going to boost your physical and magical damage. We just consider that boosting everything by a flat rate based on how many enemies are around you. But once again, the inscriptions are the important part. Duel and Execute are both very powerful inscriptions that you can use if you want to get a little bit more oomph in your damage. The damage is amplified with Duel, for example, by 1.5%, stacking up to a total of 15% damage amp. And Execute will also give you a 15% damage amp on enemies that are below a certain threshold of health. And these amplifiers only get stronger if you boost them all the way up to 4 out of 4 in their respective inscriptions. You've then got items like the Execution Axe that have a flat 50% physical damage boost, as well as a health boost for Power Skulls, and pretty decent inscriptions on it as well. We have Arms. Arms is going to increase, that is an additive, increase physical attack by 45% just by having 2 of them. So if I pick this thing up, we'll not only get the 50% more from physical damage by just equipping it, but an extra 45 on top. So that's going to make our total damage go up a lot higher. We're now sitting at 462. So if I run back over to those target dummies and I slap one and we activate our courage again, 670% total damage. You can see how just picking up one more item is making this go insanely high. If I destroy this axe, our 670 goes down to 505. That's a pretty big damage loss just by getting rid of one item that was giving us some passive bonuses. Last but not least, you have items like, say, the Gunpowder Sword. It does have some pretty good inscriptions on it, but items like this are far and few between, where the actual effect of the item far outweighs whatever inscriptions that it has. So any critical hit that we do will cause an explosion of physical damage. There is no internal cooldown to this. This is pretty nutty on builds that have high critical hit rate. Like I said, these kind of items are a lot of fun to work with, but are far and few between. And for newcomers, I highly recommend that you prioritize using builds that just stack with flat numbers and raw damage before you start getting into using niche items like the Gunpowder Sword that requires you to have a very specific type of build to make work. It's because of this particularly absurd damage stacking that I suggest if you're doing a physical build to always try and go after at least getting 4 courage in it, or if you're doing a magical build, go after at least 4 wisdom. But I'm going to give some shoutouts to particularly powerful items that you probably should pick up in almost any run you're doing. So first up, we have the ring. This thing is a contender for best item in the game because it doesn't really matter what character or build you're doing. It's kind of insane, but then again, all of these items are. So it increases your damage by 40% regardless of if it's physical or magical. 30% attack speed, that's ridiculous. 10% crit is nice. The 50% skill cooldown speed increase is also just ridiculous. And the 50 extra life at the end, it's doing so much. I'm also going to point out right now that treasure as a utility inscription is stupid broken, incredibly powerful. Just by having 2, you'll get chests in each room. These chests will give you a little bit of extra money, so just have 2 treasure and you'll have free income coming in to help you buy more items. This is a snowballing effect. You'll start off with less money, but as you go forward, you'll get more and more and more money. By the end of your run, the treasure inscription is probably paid for about 2 or 3 items in your build alone. If you manage to get 4 treasure, now you're basically just winning the game because you'll be not only be getting money, but you'll have a chance at getting more bone fragments to upgrade your characters faster, and even just straight up items can come out of these chests. Very powerful. Next up, the Pot of Greed. This will give you more damage based on how many legendary things you have. Doesn't really matter if it's an item, a skull, or a quintessence, it will count everything. Legendary skull, it's going to count. Quintessence, it's going to count. Items, it's going to count. On its own default, because it does include itself in its own calculation, it will always minimum give you 30% more damage, but if you stack up a bunch of legendaries, 120% is huge. If you get all 4 legendaries in your build and you get that full 120%, it will even spawn a free legendary item for you. It is ridiculous. It also has the treasure inscription, and it also has the antique inscription, which in my opinion is the second best defensive inscription in the game. But we'll get onto antique a little bit later. Last but not least, and this one's a little bit more niche because it requires you to have purchased the Skul DLC, the Mythology DLC. But if you do have it, I will tell you right now, the Olive Tree Cudgel, despite having a lot of orange text on it and being dominantly, supposed to be for physical skulls, it is so powerful that you can use this on a magical build and it will still be worth it. It'll still be probably like the top 3 best item that you own, even on a magic build. It's that powerful. I won't get into the nitty-gritty as to why, because there's a lot to go over, but if you see it, you take it. That's just the rule. You see it, you take it. You don't even need to know what it does. It will just do what it needs to do for you, and it will be good. Now, getting back to the defensive inscriptions, I was telling you that Antique is one of the best ones, in my opinion, the second best. So it'll give you more max life just by having 2, but the real bonus to this, and you really do have to push pretty hard to get to it, is number 4 in Antique. If you have 4 Antique, you'll take 45% less damage while your health is at 70% or more. So that's almost 50% less damage taken while you have more than 70% life. That's a big deal. In addition to that, we have Fortress. Fortress has a very similar effect where if you have 4 stacks of it, you'll take half damage while you have a barrier active. The 2-stack effect happens to give you a barrier every 35 seconds. This one is, in my opinion, the 3rd best defensive inscription because it can be a little bit more tricky to get barrier effects active. But if you're using, say, the Shield Skull, which I highly recommend Fortress with Shield Skull, he has pretty easy access to barriers, and if you have 4-stack in Fortress, he'll take virtually no damage, and it's very, very potent. But if you can't find either Antique or the best one, which is Revenge, Fortress is a nice one to go after if you can't find the others. But moving on to Revenge, and specifically the Discolored Dark Quartz, I'm shouting this out because even though it's a common item that only boosts your life as its only effect, a lot of people write this off, and we all used to write this off as being one of the worst items way back in the day. But it got touched up a little bit and got some good effects put on it, and so now the inscriptions carry this thing. It has the best and the second best defensive inscriptions in the game. This one item is busted, and it's a common. Take it. If you're needing survivability in your build, take it. To Revenge. Ridiculous effect. After you get hit by an enemy attack, as long as you hit something within 2 seconds, you'll deal bonus damage, and you'll heal back 75% of whatever damage you took. 3-second cooldown, so once every 3 seconds, you basically just take 25% of whatever damage they were going to do to you. It's insane. It doesn't require you to have a health percentage like Antique in order to kick in. It doesn't require you to have a shield effect like Fortress to kick in. Just get hit, and then hit back, and it works. The 4 stack effect for Revenge isn't even required, but if you can get to 4 Revenge, go for it. But for survivability's sake, if you're just struggling to survive, 2 Revenge in every build you do. And specifically, if you're able to get Discolored Dark Quartz and Knight's Determination, because this will also make you take less damage when your life is low. It's such a ridiculous pairing, I can't even begin to describe to you how powerful this actually is. So let's demonstrate. I'm going to come into this room here, I'm going to get hit, I'm going to hit back the enemy, and I'm going to get most of my life back from what I just took in damage. If I stand down here and this little guy hits me for 6 damage, I swipe back and I heal for 5 damage. The numbers are going to be a bit weird because they have to round up and down. I got hit for 7, slap back for 5. Look at this, I'm getting hurt, but it doesn't matter that much because I'm able to heal back the damage that I am receiving. 8 damage, heal back 6. It's just ridiculous how effective this is at keeping you alive in the long run, and you don't have to think about it. This encourages aggression. It keeps you in the fight, it keeps you attacking, and it keeps you alive first and foremost. And yes, while you're wondering and asking, if you have 4 Antique and 2 Revenge, not only are you going to take less damage, because that's just what 4 Antique makes you take. As long as your life is high, you'll take less damage. But then Revenge will help you heal back that damage as well. So now you're just surviving on God mode. Same thing if you manage to get 4 Fortress. Any effects that make you take less damage, you're going to receive less, and then Revenge will have to round those numbers up to the nearest whole number. So it could end up being that you take like 3 damage and heal back 2, effectively meaning you're getting hit for 1 damage. It's just ridiculous, dude. Take Revenge. Take Revenge. Because of all of this, I've gone ahead and taken my original tier list where I place all the different skulls based on how powerful I think they are, and I've highlighted them with red and blue circles to give you an idea as to what I think their dominant damage type is. Guys highlighted in red are physical damage dealers, guys highlighted in blue are magic damage dealers, and there are a couple of outliers like the King, Clown is in there, Gargoyle. Some of them have double rings on them. Mummy is another one where they have a little bit of blue and a little bit of red, because some of them can just work a little bit better with both depending on what kind of abilities that you get or what you want to do. For skulls like King, for example, or Prisoner, as you might know him as his unique form, he does have a pretty healthy mix of physical and magical abilities, and that's because Prisoner is just kind of special that way. He has access to the most different attacks in the entire game. Clown only has 1 dominant magic effect, and it's a bit of a meme, but you can do Magic Clown. Gargoyle has a pretty even split between physical and magical, and both honestly work for him. Mummy, I would recommend because his physical build relies on his weapons, so if you want to do physical, use weapons, use his different weapon loadouts, his bazooka, his flamethrower, all that kind of stuff. But magical Mummy relies on his skill damage more because he does have skills that do magical damage, so you kind of have choice there. But once again, going back to what I said earlier, only really dip into hybrid builds where you kind of have either half physical and half magic, or start mixing things up, in an odd way, once you become more comfortable with your builds. Until then, I highly recommend mono build. All physical, all magic. Slap in a little bit of survivability in there, and you're good to go. If you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend you go and check out my Ghoul video that I made a little bit ago, showing how he can be one of the most powerful and dominant first skulls for getting easy wins in the game. And last but not least, we have Quintessences, because I'm sure you guys are a little bit curious, and if I don't put it in this video, I'm going to have to make another one all about Quints. So here I have what I would consider the big 4 of Quintessences that are useful in almost every build, from start to finish, no need to replace them whatsoever. First up, we have Troll. This has a 40-second cooldown and will make all of your attacks crit for 5 seconds. That's just good. I shouldn't have to explain to you why having guaranteed critical hits for 5 seconds is a good thing. There's no downside to this. It's all positive. Fantastic. Next up is Slime. This is arguably maybe like top 2 Quintessences in the entire game, despite the fact that it's common. So when you use it, you'll change into a slime and take no damage for 3 seconds. This is really, really good for getting around enemy attacks that you just don't know how to deal with. So let's say a boss is doing a really big AoE or a big, nasty, scary move and you're panicking. Activate Slime. You can bounce around with it. It's cute, it's cool, it's got a very short cooldown. If you have any of the effects that make your Quintessence time faster, like the Ancient Incense Burner, for example, then this is just going to get only just better and better and better and better. This is an insanely powerful defensive tool. It works on every single build. It's marvelous. Next up is Succubus. This is a magic damage dealing effect. However, in saying that, you are completely okay to use this in a physical build because it's just that good. So when you use this Quintessence, little succubus gets spawned, swings a scythe, hits an enemy, deals damage, and will charm the enemy for 3 seconds. For those 3 seconds, that enemy can't hurt you. Are you seeing a running theme here with the slime? 3 seconds of invincibility, and 3 seconds of I can't be hurt because the succubus just hit that guy. The trade-off here is it has a longer cooldown, but it will also do damage. Preferably take this if you're using a magical build, of course, because the succubus will do more damage that way. But other than that, save this for a hairy situation, or maybe if you run into a big group of enemies, the succubus can hit all of them, and that way you can still fight while being immune at the same time. Main thing with the slime is you're immune to damage, yes, but you don't really have many ways of fighting back. The succubus is going to do damage and make you immune, and you can fight back. And in the same vein, we have Medusa, the last of the big four. Once again, magic damage, but you can still use this in physical. Medusa will do a gaze and will stun enemies. This is very potent and very powerful for stopping some enemies from doing certain attacks. This will have various mileage on certain enemies depending on if you're already doing a stun build, because diminishing returns does exist, but for the majority of the time, like 90% of the time, Medusa is going to help you stagger enemies so that you can keep doing damage and be safe during their attacks. Now, I need to give a special shout out to Orc because this is probably undeniably the most powerful Quintessence in the game as far as what it does for your damage. This only works for physical damage dealers, so it's not part of the big four because they're all based on having good utility for any build, but Orc will make you do double physical damage for 7 seconds. The trade-off is that you will take double damage for 7 seconds. I use this sparingly in quite a few of my runs if I want to get, you know, insane damage output, and it really does work for getting insane damage output. The problem is you'll die twice as fast, so no, I do not recommend that you take Orc if you're a new player. Do it if you're looking for a laugh, but once you get more comfortable with dodging enemies in the game and dealing with certain, you know, attacks coming at you, then take Orc. In the meantime, don't do it. But I'd get a lot of people mad at me if I didn't mention Orc at least once in the Quintessence section. Okay, you thought I was done. Last but not least, if we come into the settings down here, you can see that there is an option all the way down here in gameplay called Rookie Mode. If you turn on Rookie Mode, all it does is make you take 50% less damage while it is on. This is highly recommended for beginners because Skul has a pretty steep learning curve to it and can be pretty punishing, especially when you get to Act 2, 3, and 4, etc. Enemies just start going off and will probably kill you before you even know what happened. There is no shame in this. Use it if you need it. When you turn it on, you'll get a cute little icon down in the bottom that will show you that you have it turned on, so if you don't realize you have it on, you can use that as your way of knowing. And then whenever you want, you can come in and turn it off again. You can actually do this in mid-run as well. So if you're just wanting to learn a new area, like you finally got past the big tree boss in the first area and you're into the castle, and you want to learn what enemies do and you're dying too quickly, turn Rookie Mode on and you'll take less damage and you'll be able to actually see what enemies do. And then when you're feeling confident, turn it off. Then you can just do whatever you want. It can be used during runs. You don't have to do this at the beginning. You can do it whenever you feel like it. Have it turned off for doing enemies and then turn it on for boss fights, whatever you feel like. And there we are. Once again, I want to remind you that there are a lot of items and a lot of inscriptions in the game, and I barely scratched the surface, but the ones that I did show you inscription-wise will serve you well for pretty much any run you want to do. Feel free to experiment. Don't take this as gospel. This is not the way you need to do every run. This is just a very beginner-friendly little bit of advice as to what you can do for the majority of your builds, because I get asked a lot of the time, how do I build this skull? How do I build that skull? I'm doing a werewolf run. What do I use? I'm doing a mummy run. Do I have to do this? No, the answer is you can do almost anything you want to do, but if you're looking for the most streamlined, successful, do this if you want a good chance at winning. This video's got all the info that you might need to get that done. But with all of that said and done, I've got to get out of here. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments below. Either myself or someone else in the community are normally pretty good at answering, and I will see you all again next time. Have a good one.